Hello, and a very warm welcome from my holy cell in southern England. So today, did Jesus command to obey the scribes and Pharisees? Was this his attitude about them? My passage is the opening of Matthew 23, and in the New International Version, it has Jesus saying that the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, and you must obey them. And the King James Version says they sit in Moses' seat, and whatever they bid you observe, that observe and do. So the King James tells the crowd and the disciples to do what the scribes and Pharisees tell them. Well, this is strange. All that Jesus said about the scribes and Pharisees, to beware the leaven, and that they are snakes, vipers, offspring of vipers and wolves. And Jesus corrected their traditions. He rebuked them, and he condemned them and said they'd make their converts, proselytes, twice as much sons of the Valley of Hinnom as they are, so make their converts even worse, enemies of God. And said of the Pharisees and scribes themselves that they were fit to be thrown on the fire of the Valley of Hinnom, the city's burning rubbish tip. Matthew 23:15 and 33. You find those references. How extraordinary then, and when Jesus himself is around to tell the scribes and Pharisees, to tell the crowds and disciples to put into practice what they tell you when they tie burdens on men's backs, and to beware of their false teaching. How very extraordinary. Well, that is not how the translation goes in the Keys of the Kingdom Holy Bible. It says Matthew 23. Incidentally, the King James starts, then spoke Jesus. Why the inverted grammar? It's then Jesus spoke. Why did they invert it? Yeah, Hebrew and Greek does that sometimes, the verb before the subject. In the beginning created God the heavens and the earth. And they didn't do it there. Why did they do it there? So, anyway, Keys of the Kingdom. Matthew 23, 1 and 2 and 3. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and his disciples, saying, the scribes and Pharisees have taken their place on the seat of Moses. So everything that they instruct you to observe, you do observe, and you do put into practice. But do not put into practice in line with their works, for they speak, but they do not put into practice. This is very different. They've taken their place on the seat of Moses. Oh, Jesus said of them that the blood of the righteous Abel and right at the time of Zechariah would fall on those people. In other words, Jesus was aligning them with Canaanites. And indeed, King Herod was an Edomite. Forebear was Esau, who married Canaanite and Hittite women. So I wonder what sort of priests he would have promoted in the temple. So that's one difference, that Jesus was saying surely that they should not be there because they were snakes and they travelled land and sea to make commerce and make them worse than themselves. So they shouldn't have been in that place of authority. And then second, how come the NIV has you must obey them, and the KJV has what they bid you observe, that observe and do. So you must obey, NIV, do, KJV. But so those imperatives, you must obey, do, imperative verbs. But the keys of the kingdom says everything they instruct you to observe, you do observing, you do put into practice. Those are not imperatives. Those are indicatives. So this is a strong grammatical point. The verb in question is poieo, which is Strong's Concordance reference G4160. If you don't know what that means, just type it into Google and you will find out. It will take you to a wonderful online concordance, or you might have a book, better still, concordance. G is for the Greek, and for Hebrew words it begins with H. And the verb poieo is the same in the imperative, so you must obey, as it is in the indicative. You do put into practice. You do. You do what they say. How silly of you. And so, just to give you an example, imperative and indicative being the same, I could be fishing with somebody. I could take somebody as a guest and say, right, you fish by that tree. You'll get one there, and I'll fish down a bit. You fish by that tree. That's a command, an imperative. You fish. Then later I could say, I could say to somebody else, I like that section where you fish. Or I caught one where you fish. That's not a command. That's not an imperative. That's an indicative. But both of them say you fish. It's identical. And so it is with this poiete. It's the same in the imperative as it is in the indicative. The NIV translators took it as imperative. You must obey. Because they had it in their head, probably from other versions. And the King James translators have it in the imperative. Do. What they tell you to do, do. But the keys of the kingdom has it in the indicative. They've taken the seat of Moses and you're doing what they tell you. You are putting into practice. You are doing what they tell you to observe. In other words, how foolish of you. This was a warning to the crowd and the disciples not to follow these snakes, serpents, offspring of vipers, fit for the fire of the valley of Hinnom, making their followers worse than they are. So if they make their followers or their converts worse, how can Jesus be saying to them to do what they tell you? Because they'll make you worse than them even. It will corrupt your character. So it doesn't make sense to say to obey them. And there, where the Son of God, the Lord Jesus Christ, the true Messiah of Israel, is there. And crowds were following him. And then these Bibles, NIV and KJV, have Jesus telling you to obey the commands of the scribes and Pharisees. Well, no, that's not what Jesus was saying. He was saying they have stolen their seat, the seat of Moses. They do not deserve to be there. They're wolves. And you follow them, you'll be worse. And you're following them, turn away from them. Beware. So that's the grammatical point. I remember when I discovered this in the first year or two of doing my translation work, around about 98, 99 perhaps. And I told a Hebrew and Greek scholar friend I met on a holiday, and he was impressed with that. And I think the translation he's done since is perhaps the only other translation I've come across that gets this right. Well, let's hope there are others. and nobody is deceived by it. But perhaps the King James translators would not dare to say to, or have Jesus say to not follow your leaders. What a riot that would cause. So I hope you enjoyed that grammatical explanation, and with the English example of you fish, you fish. That's exactly what's going on here. Right, thank you very much for listening. God bless you all. Amen.